early Sunday morning, I was sick of doing wrong. I've been working with the devil for too long. Mama said, boy, don't keep living in sin. So I made my way to church and got born again. The preacher started preaching, he was talking to me, saying, come and see a man who can set you free. That's when I felt the presence of the Holy Ghost. Knocked me to my knees, laid me out in the floor. I'm so glad I gave my life to Jesus. Ooh, Lord, I'm so glad I heard you call. Lord, I'm glad that I have been redeemed. And I am a child of God. Yeah, I'm so glad I gave my life to Jesus. I'm so glad I heard you call. Ooh, Lord, I'm so glad that I have been redeemed. And I am a child of God. I got up from the altar and went down in the water. The Holy Ghost cleansed my soul. No longer defeated or broken in pieces. My Jesus has made me whole. I give God the glory for the things that He's done. Gave us His only begotten Son. If you can believe